Among history's most remarkable figures, two women stand whose strength and legacy still echo across centuries: Alexandra of Denmark and Elisabeth of Romania. Let us begin with the first, Alexandra of Denmark. Alexandra of Denmark was born on the 1st of December in the year 1844 at the Yellow Palace in Copenhagen, Denmark. What transformed a modest Danish princess into one of the most beloved and elegant queens in British history? How did Alexandra win the hearts of millions despite heartbreak, war, and a distant husband? What silent strength carried her from the shadows of royal court politics into the radiant light of lasting remembrance? Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Alexandra Caroline Marie Charlotte Louise Julia was the second child of Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glucksburg and Princess Louise of Hesse-Kassel. Her family lived a quiet, economical life in the Yellow Palace, a grace and favor townhouse in Copenhagen. They were royal by blood, but far from wealthy. Alexandra shared a cramped attic bedroom with her sister Dagmar, made her own clothes, and even helped serve meals at the family table. Their childhood was filled with affection, humility, and the bedtime stories of Hans Christian Andersen, who occasionally visited the home. Though they lived modestly, destiny stirred quietly around them. In 1852, when Alexandra was only 8, her father's fortunes shifted. With the approval of Europe's major powers, Prince Christian was named heir to the Danish throne. The once unnoticed Danish princess was now moving closer to the heart of European royalty, a journey that would reshape her life forever. In the year 1852, the tides of fate turned for Alexandra's family. Amidst a succession crisis in Denmark, major European powers gathered in London to resolve the dispute. The aging King Frederick VII had no heirs, and the rules of inheritance in Denmark and the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein were complex. After intense deliberation, the London Protocol declared Alexandra's father, Prince Christian, as heir to the Danish throne. Though this elevated their royal status, it did not bring immediate wealth. The family moved to Bernstorff Palace, but they continued to live frugally and kept away from Copenhagen's glittering court, refusing to associate with the king's controversial third wife, Louise Rasmussen. Alexandra and her siblings, including her brother William, the future King George I of Greece, remained close-knit, humble, and grounded. During these years, Alexandra grew into a graceful young woman, admired for her charm and simplicity. She was taught English by a local chaplain, took swimming lessons from Swedish pioneer Nancy Edberg, and was confirmed at Christiansborg Palace. Her devout Christian faith and quiet discipline made a strong impression on those who met her. By the time she turned 16, Alexandra was unknowingly being considered for one of the most powerful roles in Europe, the future bride of Albert Edward, Prince of Wales. Her family's sudden rise in royal status had made her a suitable match. What began as a quiet life in a modest household was now steering her toward the British royal family. As Alexandra blossomed into a poised and graceful young woman, her name surfaced quietly among royal matchmakers. Across the North Sea, Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert were seeking a suitable bride for their eldest son, Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales. Their daughter, Crown Princess Victoria of Prussia, had been tasked with scouting potential candidates. Though the Danish royal family was not their first choice, largely due to strained relations between Denmark and Prussia, Alexandra's refined upbringing, noble character, and beauty gradually won them over. In September of 1861, Alexandra met Prince Albert Edward for the first time in the German city of Speyer. Their meeting, though brief, left a lasting impression on both. After a year marked by Prince Albert's death and Edward's scandalous affair with Nellie Clifton, Queen Victoria softened her stance. The young prince formally proposed to Alexandra in September of 1862 at Leeken Castle in Belgium, the home of King Leopold I. Their engagement was met with warm anticipation on both sides. Though they came from vastly different cultures, Alexandra's charm, calm temperament, and respect for duty appealed deeply to the British royal household. Preparations for the wedding began in earnest, and Alexandra readied herself for a life in a foreign land, far from her close-knit family. Behind her serene composure was a young woman facing the immense weight of responsibility. She was about to step into the spotlight of the British monarchy, not just as a princess, but as the future queen consort. On the 7th of March in 1863, Princess Alexandra arrived in England aboard the royal yacht Victoria and Albert, greeted with joyous crowds in Gravesend, Kent. Her arrival stirred deep public enthusiasm. Composer Arthur Sullivan created music in her honor, and poet laureate Alfred, Lord Tennyson, wrote a rousing ode, "See King's Daughter from Over the Sea." Alexandra had already begun winning British hearts. 3 days later, on the 10th of March, she married Prince Albert Edward at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. The ceremony was held outside London, drawing criticism from the press, which lamented that the public couldn't witness the royal union firsthand. Due to Prince Albert's recent death, the court was still in mourning. Women were restricted to wearing muted colors, gray, lilac, or mauve. The wedding was an intimate affair. Alexandra's Danish relatives were few, and some royal guests found the venue inconvenient. Yet the ceremony was deeply symbolic, marking not just a union between two individuals, but a political bridge between Britain and Denmark. However, that bridge was fragile. Soon after the wedding, tensions between Denmark and the German Confederation flared into conflict over the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. Queen Victoria and the Prussian royal family leaned pro-German, while Alexandra and Edward supported Denmark, a stance that created quiet friction within the royal household. Amid this tension, Alexandra gave birth to her first child in early 1864. Just 20 years old, she had become a wife, mother, and future queen, balancing personal happiness with the rising weight of royal diplomacy. From the moment Alexandra became Princess of Wales in 1863, she held the title longer than anyone in British history, nearly 40 years. With her natural grace, delicate beauty, and dignified poise, she quickly captured the public's imagination. Women across Britain copied her fashions, high necklines, choker necklaces, and even her unique limp, a result of rheumatic fever, became part of what was dubbed the Alexandra style. She embraced her public role with elegance. Always composed in front of crowds, Alexandra performed countless charitable visits, opened hospitals, and attended royal events with unwavering dignity. She became a powerful symbol of femininity and decency, loved by the people and respected by the court. Her devotion to causes like the London Hospital was deeply personal. She met patients like Joseph Merrick, known as the Elephant Man, offering compassion without condescension. But her glamorous image masked a life of emotional strain. Alexandra was excluded from political matters and royal decision-making. Her attempts to promote Danish and Greek interests were brushed aside. Meanwhile, her husband, Albert Edward, maintained a reputation for frequent affairs and lavish entertainments, causing embarrassment and pain behind closed doors. Despite these difficulties, Alexandra remained loyal, focusing her energy on her children, public service, and quiet faith. Her popularity only grew as the years passed, but her world at home remained complex, distant, and often lonely. The Princess of Wales was admired from afar, but inside the palace, she lived a life marked by royal tension, marital compromise, and the quiet endurance of duty. Alexandra's devotion to her children was unwavering. She gave birth to 6 in total: Albert Victor, George, Louise, Victoria, Maud, and little Alexander John, who died the day after his birth. From the early days, Alexandra took pride in personally caring for her babies, often donning a flannel apron, washing them herself, and staying close until they were asleep. She found comfort in the nursery, a space where her love and attention could shine freely. However, motherhood was not without sorrow. Each of her children was reportedly born prematurely, and Alexandra was once struck with a severe case of rheumatic fever during her 3rd pregnancy in 1867. The illness left her with a lifelong limp and damaged her hearing. While she never complained publicly, the effects of her illness slowly isolated her from court life and society gatherings. Privately, her marriage with Albert Edward grew distant. While he traveled, socialized, and maintained relationships with women like Lily Langtry and Alice Capel, Alexandra remained faithful. She poured her energy into her children, charitable work, and quiet reflection. Despite moments of reconciliation, particularly during Edward's illness in 1871, the emotional bond between them never fully healed. She also suffered additional blows, such as the loss of her infant son Alexander John and the disapproval of Queen Victoria. Yet through it all, Alexandra remained composed, loving, and resilient. Her identity as a mother and symbol of virtue gave her strength in a world that often left her emotionally alone. The royal household of the late 19th century was no stranger to scandal, and Alexandra found herself caught in its shadows more than once. In the mid-1870s, while Prince Albert Edward planned a hunting tour to India, Alexandra was left behind, a disappointment she bore quietly. But far more troubling was a scandal brewing at home. During Edward's absence, a potential divorce between Lord and Lady Aylesford threatened to explode into public disgrace. Lady Aylesford, with the help of Lord Randolph Churchill, attempted to pressure Alexandra by warning they would implicate the Prince of Wales if proceedings moved forward. Shocked and distressed, Alexandra alerted Queen Victoria, who in turn intervened with her son. Though the divorce was eventually dropped, the rift left a lasting impression. Prince Albert Edward refused to speak to Churchill for years afterward. Alexandra's sense of diplomacy was also tested by her personal loyalties. In the Russo-Turkish War of the late 1870s, she openly supported Russia. Her sister Dagmar was married to the Tsarevich, and Greece, where her brother reigned. She even lobbied for changes to the Greek-Turkish border, earning quiet disapproval from British officials who viewed her interference as unwelcome. Throughout these episodes, Alexandra walked a delicate line between duty and personal conviction. Though excluded from formal politics, her royal connections gave her influence she used to champion family, heritage, and causes close to her heart. But the strain of maintaining dignity amidst controversy only deepened her quiet emotional solitude. Despite her quiet nature and private griefs, Alexandra traveled widely during her years as Princess of Wales. In 1868 and 1869, she and Prince Albert Edward embarked on an extended tour across Austria, Egypt, and Greece. The journey, though tiring, brought Alexandra moments of relief and reconnection, especially her visit to her brother, King George I of Greece. She even ventured alone into the harem of the Khedive of Egypt, and later became the first woman to dine with the Sultan of Turkey, breaking centuries of custom with quiet grace. Alexandra's bond with her siblings remained a source of strength. Her closeness with Dagmar, who had become Tsarina Maria Feodorovna of Russia, was especially deep. In 1881, after the assassination of Alexander II of Russia, Alexandra rushed to St. Petersburg to comfort her grieving sister. She stayed at Maria's side through the funeral, praying and mourning with her as only a sister could. But Alexandra's own heart was shattered in 1892 when her eldest son, Prince Albert Victor, died suddenly at the age of 28. She kept his room exactly as he had left it and never fully recovered from the loss. "I have buried my angel," she once said, "and with him my happiness." In these years, travel and family gave Alexandra fleeting moments of joy. Yet death followed closely behind, and grief became a quiet companion. Even in her brightest public appearances, sorrow clung to her expression, not as a sign of weakness, but of a mother and sister who had loved deeply and lost profoundly. In January of 1901, the death of Queen Victoria marked the end of an era and the beginning of Alexandra's most formal role. Her husband, now King Edward VII, ascended the throne, and Alexandra became Queen Empress of the United Kingdom and the British Dominions, as well as Empress of India. Though her political power remained limited, her symbolic role expanded dramatically. Alexandra faced her new position with composure, continuing her charitable commitments and maintaining a strong public presence. But the transition was not without drama. Just before the scheduled coronation in June of 1902, King Edward fell seriously ill with appendicitis, a condition not well understood at the time. Public anxiety surged, and Alexandra tried to maintain calm by attending military parades and events alone, projecting strength in the face of uncertainty. Thanks to an emergency operation by Dr. Frederick Treves, Edward recovered, and the coronation was postponed by several weeks. On the 9th of August, the royal couple were crowned together at Westminster Abbey, Edward by the Archbishop of Canterbury and Alexandra by the Archbishop of York. The delayed ceremony was still grand and symbolic, watched with admiration across the empire. Despite her new title, Alexandra's duties changed little. She kept many of her former household staff, including her devoted lady of the bedchamber, Charlotte Knollys, who once saved her from a fire in her bedroom. Alexandra's preference for routine, familiar faces, and limited political intrusion kept her grounded in a role she neither sought nor resisted, a queen whose grace rested not in power, but in presence. Though Alexandra now held the grand title of Queen Empress, she remained firmly excluded from the political inner circle. King Edward VII, along with his ministers, kept her away from sensitive documents and state matters. Alexandra's attempts to influence policy, particularly regarding Denmark, Greece, or Germany, were politely ignored or quietly resisted. Her distrust of Germany, especially her nephew Emperor Wilhelm II, was no secret. She viewed him as a threat and opposed any British foreign policy that aligned with German interests. In 1890, Alexandra even wrote a personal memorandum warning against the British exchange of Heligoland for Zanzibar. She believed Heligoland could be fortified by Germany and used as a launching point for aggression. Though her concerns were dismissed at the time, history later proved her right. The island became a strategic military base during wartime. Her political instincts, rooted in loyalty to family and national pride, often clashed with the diplomacy of her era. Newspapers in Germany even accused Alexandra and her sister Maria of leading an international anti-German conspiracy. Despite these frictions, Alexandra remained composed in public. She continued attending royal functions, kept close ties with her extended family in Denmark and Russia, and quietly encouraged charitable causes. yet the corridors of influence remained closed to her. Behind the throne, Alexandra was respected but restrained, a queen whose wisdom was often overlooked, even when it foresaw the shadows of conflict already gathering over Europe. In May of 1910, Alexandra's world shifted once more. While visiting her brother George in Corfu, she received word that King Edward VII had fallen gravely ill. She returned to England just in time to be by his side during his final hours, personally administering oxygen in a desperate effort to ease his pain. On the 6th of May, the king passed away, and Alexandra became a widow at the age of 65. Her grief was immense. "I feel as if I had been turned to stone," she confessed, unable to weep or grasp the depth of her loss. Soon after, she moved from Buckingham Palace to Marlborough House, continuing to live quietly at Sandringham. Her son, George V, was now king, and Alexandra assumed the title of Queen Mother, a role she embraced with quiet dignity. Though she did not attend George and Mary's coronation in 1911. Tradition dictated that crowned queens did not witness new coronations. Alexandra remained deeply engaged in public life. She continued championing charitable work, especially her beloved Alexandra Rose Day, which raised money for hospitals. During World War I, she stood firmly against all symbols of German royalty, urging the removal of foreign banners from the Order of the Garter in Windsor Chapel. Even in her sorrow, Alexandra remained a comforting figure to the nation. Her sense of duty never wavered, even as war, revolution, and family tragedy darkened the world around her. As Queen Mother, she guided by example, with grace, silence, and enduring strength during one of the most turbulent decades in British history. As the First World War raged, Alexandra watched the world she had known collapse around her. Royal cousins turned into enemies, empires crumbled, and tragedy crept ever closer to home. In Russia, her nephew Tsar Nicholas II and his entire family were murdered by revolutionaries in 1918. Her beloved sister, the Dowager Empress Maria, was rescued and brought to England, where she lived with Alexandra for a time, broken and silent. The horror of Russia's collapse weighed heavily on both sisters. Back in Britain, Alexandra maintained her public image with determination. She still appeared dignified in ceremonies and charitable events, though her hearing had grown worse, and she often relied on visual cues. Always conscious of her appearance, she took to wearing heavy makeup and elaborate veils to hide signs of aging. Yet beneath the surface, her health was failing and her memory was beginning to fade. Despite this decline, the public continued to adore her. She had become a symbol of steadiness, a link to the Victorian past, and a living reminder of values that seemed to be vanishing in a modern world torn by war. But in private, Alexandra carried deep pain. She had lost her husband, her son, her nephew, and many of the joys of youth. Her isolation deepened as the royal court moved forward without her. Still, she never abandoned her role. Even as her speech faltered and her memory dimmed, Alexandra remained a presence of gentle dignity, one who had seen beauty, sorrow, and history pass through her quiet, enduring gaze. Long after she stepped away from the royal spotlight, Queen Alexandra's legacy continued to grow, not through power or politics, but through compassion, culture, and grace. Her most cherished contribution was Alexandra Rose Day, launched in 1882. It began as a simple idea, selling artificial roses to raise money for hospitals. The initiative became a beloved national tradition and continues to this day, helping those in need with quiet impact. Alexandra also left a deep imprint on the world of fashion. Her signature style, high collars, long necklaces, and elegant gowns, shaped trends across Europe. She wore chokers to hide a childhood neck scar and inspired women of all classes to emulate her poise. After her illness in the 1860s, she walked with a limp. Remarkably, some society women copied her gait, known as the Alexandra limp, a strange but telling sign of how admired she was. Even in widowhood, Alexandra remained a cultural icon. Her presence graced hospital openings, musical events, and charity fairs. She was also a devoted amateur photographer, preserving images of family and royal life with a personal touch. Theaters, military hospitals, and even a nursing corps were named in her honor, including the Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps, which remains active today. While never a ruler in law, Alexandra ruled in affection and admiration. Her charm, modesty, and unwavering kindness ensured she would be remembered not just as a queen, but as a beloved figure of British life, whose influence extended far beyond the throne. In the final years of her life, Queen Alexandra gradually withdrew from public view. Age and illness had taken their toll. By the early 1920s, her once bright memory began to dim, and her speech became slow and unclear. In 1920, she suffered a burst blood vessel in her eye, leaving her partially blind for a time. Yet, even as her health declined, Alexandra maintained a sense of personal dignity, always appearing in carefully chosen veils and gowns, her face powdered, her posture graceful. She remained at Sandringham House, the quiet Norfolk estate she had loved for decades. Surrounded by memories of her children and late husband, Alexandra found peace in familiar surroundings. Her loyal staff, including those who had served her since her days as Princess of Wales, stayed close until the end. Visitors found her gentle, still witty at times and forever polite, a woman who had once stood beside emperors and kings, now content with warm tea and quiet afternoons. On the 20th of November in 1925, Alexandra passed away peacefully at the age of 80. Her body lay in state at Westminster Abbey, where thousands came to pay their respects. She was buried beside her beloved husband in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, closing a chapter that had spanned the Victorian, Edwardian, and early modern eras. The nation mourned deeply. Newspapers spoke of her kindness, her resilience, and her unparalleled grace. Britain had lost not just a queen mother, but a gentle soul who had weathered the storms of a century with unfailing poise. Even after her death, the memory of Queen Alexandra lingered warmly in the hearts of the British people. Monuments were erected in her honor, including the Queen Alexandra Memorial unveiled in London in 1932. On that day, the air was filled with music and tribute, as Sir Edward Elgar's ode, "So many true princesses who have gone," echoed through the streets. It was a farewell not just to a royal figure, but to a beloved symbol of grace and kindness. Alexandra's influence endured in many quiet ways. Her legacy continued through charitable institutions, such as the Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps and the enduring tradition of Alexandra Rose Day. Her sense of style shaped generations of women, and her gentle character became a standard by which future queens were measured. She had never held political power, yet she shaped the public imagination more than many rulers. In a world that had witnessed empire, war, and revolution, Alexandra remained a figure of continuity, the steady hand and warm heart behind the British crown. Her life was filled with personal trials, but she met each one with elegance and silence. History remembers her not only as a queen, but as a woman of deep humanity, a princess who rose from modest beginnings to become one of Britain's most cherished royal figures. Through loss, love, duty, and resilience, Alexandra of Denmark left behind a legacy that still speaks to grace under pressure and dignity without demand. let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. Elisabeth of Romania was born on the 12th of October in the year 1894 at Piel's Castle in Sinea, Kingdom of Romania. How did this thoughtful and poetic princess find herself crowned in a foreign land? What secrets did she conceal behind her pen name and her royal titles? And how did the pain of losing a child forever shape the voice of a queen who never truly fit the mold expected of her? Elisabeth Pauline Ottilie Luyse of Wied was the daughter of Herman, Prince of Wied, and Princess Marie of Nassau. Born into a minor but respected German princely house, her early years were surrounded by books, discipline, and melancholic beauty. Unlike other children of her rank, Elisabeth's education was overseen directly by her mother, who stressed intellectual refinement, strict moral training, and solitary study over courtly pleasures. The castle in Neuwied, nestled along the Rhine, offered a serene but quiet childhood. Elisabeth became fluent in several languages, especially German, French, and later Romanian. She developed a lifelong passion for literature, music, and painting. From an early age, her heart beat with the rhythm of poetry and solitude. She didn't chase the glittering life of court balls and pageantry. Instead, she found comfort in quiet forests, classical tales, and the scribbled pages of her own verse. But beyond this inward life, destiny stirred. Across the Carpathians, the young Principality of Romania searched for a queen, and Elisabeth's path would soon lead her far from the Rhine into a life of love, grief, and transformation. Elisabeth's early childhood was shaped by both privilege and sorrow. Though born into a noble household, her upbringing was anything but indulgent. Her mother, Princess Marie of Nassau, was a deeply religious and disciplined woman who believed in moral clarity, spiritual devotion, and strict habits. Elisabeth's days began early, filled with structured lessons, music practice, and long periods of silent reading, all within the echoing halls of Neuwied Castle. The family rarely traveled beyond their estate, and Elisabeth's interactions with other children were limited. She was naturally shy and introspective, often retreating to the gardens or library where she would daydream or scribble poetry in secret. Yet, these lonely hours became the fertile ground for her imagination, shaping her future as a poet and writer. Tragedy struck when Elisabeth's younger brother died in infancy. Though the event was quietly spoken of, it cast a long emotional shadow over the household. Elisabeth, sensitive and intuitive, internalized the loss and began to see life through a veil of sorrow and reflection. Her writings, even as a young girl, were marked by themes of loss, longing, and spiritual search. She grew increasingly devoted to languages, excelling in German and French, and later studying English and Italian. With every book she read and every poem she wrote, Elisabeth drifted further from the expected path of a noblewoman. She was not drawn to power or politics. Instead, she longed for meaning, a place where her quiet voice might be heard in a world that favored spectacle over soul. As Elisabeth entered adolescence, her identity as a writer and thinker deepened. She began crafting verses under the pseudonym Carmen Silva, a name that would one day echo across Europe's literary salons. The Latin words, "Song of the Forest," perfectly captured her spirit, poetic, solitary, and tied to the quiet mystery of nature. Her poems, journals, and stories reflected a restless inner world. She wrote of rivers and mountains, of unseen sorrow, of hidden strength, and the beauty of silence. Her work was introspective and vivid, often exploring themes of sacrifice, womanhood, and spiritual yearning. While other noble girls learned court manners and danced at winter balls, Elisabeth poured herself into literature, art, and reflection. Her parents grew concerned about her intensity. She was intelligent and obedient, but also emotionally distant, resisting the conventional roles expected of a young noblewoman. Suitors were quietly discussed, but Elisabeth expressed little interest in marriage. She dreamt not of castles and crowns, but of quiet corners, ink-stained fingers, and the company of great writers. Yet as Europe shifted and alliances formed, Elisabeth's noble lineage and cultured upbringing made her a potential match for foreign courts. In the mid-1860s, eyes turned toward the young Principality of Romania, newly seeking stability, prestige, and a queen to stand beside its prince. Unbeknownst to Elisabeth, her private world of verse was about to collide with the public demands of monarchy, and her soul, so carefully kept apart, would soon be tested in a land far from home. In the year 1869, Elisabeth of Wide became Queen of Romania, a transformation that seemed more like a story from her own poetry than a planned destiny. She married Prince Carol of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen, who had recently taken the Romanian throne as dominator or ruling prince. Their union was arranged with diplomatic care, but Elisabeth, ever the romantic, believed she had found not just a position, but a partner for the soul. Her arrival in Bucharest marked a dramatic shift. Romania was still forming its national identity, a country of rural rhythms, deep Orthodox traditions, and political uncertainty. Elisabeth, a Protestant German woman fluent in literature but unfamiliar with Balkan customs, stepped into the palace as an outsider. From the beginning, she wore the crown with hesitation. Though warmly received by many Romanians, Elisabeth found the court formal, the aristocracy suspicious, and the language barrier difficult. She struggled to adjust to the weight of royal expectations and the strict discipline of her new husband, Carol, who was deeply committed to duty and order. Despite the cultural divide, Elisabeth threw herself into learning the Romanian language and immersing herself in the life of her new homeland. She visited hospitals, spoke with villagers, and sought to understand the spirit of the country she now served. But beneath her elegant composure, she often felt adrift, a poet in a palace, a woman of thought surrounded by politics, tradition, and expectation. In public, she smiled and stood tall. But in private letters and verses, Elisabeth confessed her doubts. She had become queen, but what did that mean to a heart more attuned to solitude than to ceremony? Elisabeth's transition from a quiet German castle to the vibrant but volatile world of Romania was not without struggle. The royal court in Bucharest was a complex arena, filled with unfamiliar customs, cautious nobles, and political intrigue. As a German-born Protestant queen in a predominantly Orthodox and Balkan-rooted society, Elisabeth stood apart, admired by some, mistrusted by others. She worked hard to overcome this cultural distance. Elisabeth learned the Romanian language quickly, not just the formal speech of court, but the poetry and folklore of the people. She attended Orthodox services, visited local communities, and hosted gatherings that mixed European elegance with local tradition. In private, she read Romanian poets and explored the music and embroidery of her adopted land. She genuinely sought to understand the spirit of the country, even if she never fully belonged. But her foreign background remained a quiet tension. Some Romanian politicians viewed her as too sympathetic to German interests, particularly during times of regional unrest. Meanwhile, her deep emotional sensitivity clashed with the hard pragmatism of her husband, Prince Carol. Their relationship was distant, rooted in mutual respect, but lacking warmth. Carol valued order, discipline, and loyalty. Elisabeth longed for connection, understanding, and soul. Within the palace, she often found herself isolated. Her role was largely ceremonial, and she was not invited to influence state matters. Yet even in her solitude, Elisabeth left an impression. Her kindness to servants, interest in the arts, and gentle nature earned quiet affection. She was not a queen of spectacle, she was a queen of presence. And though the court often misunderstood her, the people slowly began to see her heart. The marriage between Elisabeth and Prince Carol was, from the beginning, a union of contrasts. Carol, rigid and principled, viewed his role through the lens of duty and structure. Elisabeth, poetic and introspective, longed for emotional connection and intellectual exchange. Though the pair respected one another, their differences ran deep, and over time, those differences became quiet distances. Carol expected his wife to embody the model of a disciplined consort, dignified, restrained, and politically discreet. But Elisabeth's soul resisted uniformity. She brought warmth and empathy to the court, often defying protocol in her efforts to connect with the Romanian people. She preferred books to banquets, hospitals to grand balls, and found solace in writing rather than in royal spectacle. Their communication became strained. Carol often kept her excluded from matters of state, believing that her emotional temperament and foreign upbringing made her unsuitable for political conversation. Elisabeth, in turn, withdrew into herself, finding in her pen and her private journals the intimacy missing from her marriage. In public, they remained courteous and formal. Behind closed doors, their relationship grew increasingly detached. Moments of shared grief, like the loss of their daughter, would later bring them closer in mourning, but never in true companionship. Despite the emotional gaps, Elisabeth continued to fulfill her role with grace. But inside the grand walls of the palace, she remained a woman often misunderstood. A queen bound not by passion or power, but by the silent endurance of a role that gave her little voice, yet demanded her full presence. The deepest sorrow of Elisabeth's life struck in 1874, when her only child, Princess Maria, fell ill with scarlet fever. At just 4 years old, the golden-haired girl, nicknamed Itty by her parents, became the center of Elisabeth's universe. Her birth had softened the emotional distance between the queen and her husband, offering a brief season of shared tenderness in the royal household. But the illness came swiftly, and doctors could do little. Elisabeth stayed at her daughter's side, reading poems, singing lullabies, and praying through the nights. Despite every effort, little Maria passed away on the 9th of April in their home at the Kotrosny Palace. The loss devastated Elisabeth, who would never fully recover. She dressed in mourning for years, retreating from public duties and refusing to speak of her daughter without tears. In poems penned under the name Carmen Silva, Elisabeth poured out her anguish, writing of angels, vanished dreams, and the quiet echo of children's laughter now stilled. "I was a queen," she once wrote, "but I became only a grieving mother." The tragedy also deepened the rift between Elisabeth and Carol. While he mourned privately, Elisabeth yearned for shared comfort. Instead, she found herself alone, a queen without an heir, a wife without closeness, and a mother marked by unbearable absence. From this loss, a different Elisabeth began to emerge, one more withdrawn from court life, but more determined to speak through poetry and purpose. The queen who had once doubted her role now sought new meaning in the face of irreparable grief. From the ashes of heartbreak, Elisabeth of Romania was reborn through the written word. Under her chosen pen name, Carmen Silva, she began publishing poetry, essays, folk tales, and philosophical reflections, creating a literary voice that captivated readers across Europe. The name itself, meaning Song of the Forest, became a symbol of her inner world, reflective, soulful, and deeply connected to both sorrow and beauty. Her writing was more than a hobby, it became a lifeline. Through verse and story, Elisabeth processed the pain of losing her daughter, the isolation of her marriage, and the weight of royal expectation. She wrote in German, French, Romanian, and English, often blending folklore with moral insight and realism with mysticism. Her works touched on themes of sacrifice, divine justice, feminine strength, and the invisible battles of the human spirit. Elisabeth did not write as a distant queen, but as a woman who had suffered, observed, and endured. Her collection, Thoughts of a Queen, and her poetic volume, Songs of Toil, were widely read. She also translated Romanian legends and peasant songs into German, helping bridge the cultural gap between her homeland and her adopted country. Though some Romanian elites disapproved of her growing literary fame, believing it distracted from her royal duties, Elisabeth found comfort and identity in her art. Through Carmen Silva, she could speak freely in a world that so often demanded silence. This period marked her transformation from a grieving consort into a celebrated writer, a queen whose crown may have felt heavy, but whose pen lifted the voices of sorrow, beauty, and truth far beyond palace walls. Beyond her poetry, Queen Elisabeth carved a quiet but lasting legacy through her compassion for Romania's poor. She believed deeply in service and dignity, and though her reforms were not grand or widely publicized, they touched lives in tangible, lasting ways. As queen, she visited hospitals, orphanages, and rural villages, often arriving without warning, simply to listen and observe. She founded charities to support widows, war veterans, and sick children. One of her most enduring contributions was her work in improving conditions for women, especially in access to education and health care. Elisabeth encouraged girls' schooling, supported female nurses, and advocated for training programs that gave women real paths to independence. Her empathy, shaped by personal sorrow, made her especially sensitive to the voiceless, those forgotten by the court but seen by the queen. Elisabeth also introduced cultural initiatives. She sponsored traditional Romanian weaving, embroidery, and music, helping preserve local crafts while offering income to rural families. Under her encouragement, folk arts were displayed at European exhibitions, giving Romanian heritage international recognition. Though her husband Carol preferred stricter lines between monarchy and common life, Elisabeth's efforts remained rooted in moral duty. She once said, "A queen must be a mother to all," and in that spirit, she saw herself not as ruler, but as caretaker. These actions, though modest in scope, won her quiet loyalty from many Romanians. Even those who questioned her foreign roots began to admire her dedication. Through acts of tenderness rather than laws, Elisabeth reshaped what it meant to serve, not as a sovereign with power, but as a witness to suffering and a quiet hand reaching back. While Elisabeth was beloved for her compassion and poetry, her involvement in political matters proved far more controversial. In moments of national crisis, her instinct to act from the heart clashed with the strict boundaries of constitutional monarchy, and it nearly brought ruin. During the peasant revolt of 1888, Elisabeth made the fateful decision to shelter a prominent opposition leader inside the royal palace, against the wishes of her husband and government. Though motivated by empathy and a desire for peace, the act was seen as reckless. Critics accused her of undermining royal authority and interfering in state affairs. Her German background, once quietly tolerated, now fueled suspicion. As tensions in Europe deepened and alliances shifted, whispers spread that Elisabeth's loyalties lay not with Romania, but with foreign powers, especially Germany and Austria. She was seen by some politicians as naive, by others as dangerously independent. Prince Carol was furious over her unauthorized involvement and demanded her complete withdrawal from public affairs. Deeply humiliated, Elisabeth retreated from court life and political discourse. Her earlier acts of charity and cultural advocacy were quietly overshadowed by this misstep. In the years that followed, she focused solely on writing and spiritual contemplation. Her role became ceremonial, and her voice, once filled with poetry and reform, faded from state matters. Though her intentions had always been sincere, Elisabeth learned that even queens could be punished for caring too deeply. In the world of kings and borders, feelings had little place, and her heart had strayed too far. As the First Great War loomed over Europe, Elisabeth found herself caught in a storm of loyalties that tore at her soul. Romania, surrounded by powerful empires and tangled in alliances, struggled to maintain its position. But for Elisabeth, the conflict was not just political, it was deeply personal. Born a German princess, her family ties stretched across many of the ruling houses now at war. Her cousins sat on thrones in Berlin and Vienna, while her adopted homeland leaned cautiously toward the Allies. When Romania finally entered World War I in 1916 on the side of the Allies, Elisabeth's heart fractured. Her writings reveal a woman torn, loyal to her country, yet haunted by the suffering of her native people. By then, she had long retreated from political life, but even in silence, her presence drew scrutiny. Some Romanian officials suspected her of harboring sympathies for the Central Powers. Others feared that her foreign origins made her a symbol of the old world, a relic of dynastic ties in a time of national survival. Elisabeth spent most of the war at the royal estates, surrounded by books, letters, and the echo of distant cannon fire. She wrote prayers, meditations, and reflections on the cost of war, not just on nations, but on the soul. Through poetry, she grieved for both sides, praying for a peace that seemed farther away with every passing day. Though no longer queen in influence, Elisabeth remained a witness to history's fury, her inner conflict a mirror to the fractured world around her. In a time of division, she carried both love and guilt, loyalty and grief, the quiet burdens of a woman bound to two homelands now at war. In the years following the war, Elisabeth withdrew almost entirely from public life. Her royal duties faded, replaced by long stretches of quiet solitude at the Peels and Katrosny palaces, and sometimes in the countryside, where the rhythm of nature offered a balm for her restless spirit. She rarely appeared at court functions, choosing instead the company of books, trusted servants, and occasional visits from literary friends. Her pen remained her closest companion. Elisabeth, as Carmen Silva, continued to write, no longer for acclaim, but for reflection. Her later works grew increasingly introspective, filled with spiritual longing and quiet lamentations. She wrote of time, memory, and the burdens of duty. Her stories blended dreams with scripture and sorrow with serenity. The once vibrant voice of a reforming queen had become the voice of an aging poet seeking peace in her final chapters. She also traveled within Romania during this time, though her journeys were modest and private. She visited mountain villages, listened to the songs of shepherds, and recorded the legends of local communities. These quiet wanderings became a personal pilgrimage, not of conquest, but of connection. Those who met her in these later years described her as kind, thoughtful, and deeply spiritual. Her eyes carried the weight of grief, but her manner remained gentle. She no longer sought to shape the court or influence politics. She sought only understanding of the land she had adopted, the people she had served, and the soul she had so often hidden behind verse. In this seclusion, Elisabeth finally found what eluded her in youth, a kind of freedom that came not from position, but from release. When King Carol passed away in 1914, Elisabeth stepped into widowhood with a quiet dignity that matched the tone of her later life. Though she had long been distant from court affairs, the loss of her husband marked the end of a chapter defined by duty, tension, and shared silence. Their marriage had been complex, but his absence left her both free and strangely hollow. As Queen Dowager, Elisabeth chose not to assert herself politically. She kept a respectful distance from the new royal household led by Ferdinand and Marie, offering occasional advice but never interfering. Instead, she retreated further into the role she had come to embrace most, that of Carmen Sylva, the writer, observer, and moral voice on the margins of power. Her poetry deepened in tone. Themes of grief, memory, and spiritual reckoning took center stage in her later works. She began publishing reflective prose pieces and meditations on aging, faith, and the illusions of royalty. Her words carried a wisdom born of loss and observation, the kind of wisdom earned not from speeches or governance, but from watching history unfold from behind a lace curtain. Elisabeth also became a mentor to young Romanian writers and artists, encouraging them to preserve their cultural identity. Though her influence on the court waned, her literary presence remained respected. In these final years of authorship, Elisabeth no longer sought applause. She sought truth. Her voice was no longer regal, but timeless, the steady echo of a soul that had known both the silence of palaces and the solitude of poetry. In the final stretch of her life, Elisabeth of Romania lived like a shadow of another time, not forgotten, but gently faded. She resided mostly at the castles of Sinaia and Bucharest, surrounded by the quiet echoes of her past. Her once grand court had long since been replaced by a smaller circle of attendants, readers, and friends who understood the rhythms of her solitude. Each morning she walked the palace gardens, leaning on her cane, pausing by the flowers she once described in verse. The garden became her sanctuary, a living poem where she could reflect without interruption. Roses reminded her of lost embraces, lilacs of early spring at Newweed, and old stone paths led her back to memories too delicate to be spoken aloud. She continued writing, though more slowly, more inwardly. Her journals during these years are filled with meditations on time, the soul's journey, and the unseen value of a quiet life. "I once wore a crown," she wrote in one entry, "but it is my pen that gave me peace." Elisabeth no longer sought relevance. She welcomed the passing seasons like old friends, accepting her fading eyesight and aching limbs with the grace of one who had seen too much to protest. Visitors who came expecting a summer queen often found instead a gentle hostess with soft words, a knowing smile, and books stacked at her bedside. In this twilight, Elisabeth found something that had eluded her for most of her reign, a sense of stillness. It was in the garden, among silence and shadow, that the queen poet finally belonged entirely to herself. Queen Elisabeth of Romania passed away on the 14th of November in the year 1956 at Villa Rose Alba in Cannes, France. Her death, quiet and without ceremony, marked the end of a life defined more by reflection than rule, a life that often unfolded in margins rather than in the spotlight. She was buried near her husband, King Carol, in the royal necropolis at Curtea de Arges Monastery. Though their marriage had been distant and complex, their final resting place symbolized the unity expected of royalty, if not always shared in life. Her funeral was modest, shaped by the wartime constraints of a nation now caught in global conflict. But Elisabeth's legacy was never about grandeur. It lived on in the hearts of those she had touched, the sick she had comforted, the women she had quietly empowered, and the readers who found truth and solace in her poetry. Under the name Carmen Sylva, her works continued to be read across Europe, resonating with those who had loved, lost, and longed for meaning. She left behind no biological heir, but her literary and humanitarian legacy endured. Elisabeth had redefined what it meant to be royal, not through command or decree, but through empathy, resilience, and the power of words. In the end, Elisabeth of Romania was more than a queen. She was a woman who turned silence into strength and sorrow into song, a monarch who, in stepping back from power, gave the world something far more lasting, a soul laid bare on paper. What do you think about Alexandra of Denmark? Was Alexandra a graceful symbol of British monarchy, beloved for her charm, resilience, and quiet dignity as she stood beside a complex king and weathered decades of change? Or was she a lonely consort, overshadowed by public adoration, privately burdened by scandal, silence, and the emotional distance of a royal marriage? And what about Elisabeth of Romania? Was Elisabeth a poetic soul, a queen who served through art, compassion, and cultural devotion, giving voice to the forgotten through the words of Carmen Silva? Or a misunderstood outsider, estranged from politics, shaped by grief, and remembered more for her sorrow than for the strength she gave in silence? We would love to hear your thoughts. Were these royal women symbols of endurance and empathy, or shadows of courts that demanded much and gave little? Did their legacies live on through crowns, or through the quiet truths they left behind in gestures, gardens, and verse? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales from the past, stories of courage, choice, and the quiet force behind history. Thank you so much for watching.